you girls looking at?
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So those of you who have been following my channel recently will know that I've been reviewing a whole bunch of random 6th generation titles, and it's gotten to the point where I've basically been doing them on the fly. The vast majority of my recent reviews have been for games that I played for the first time recently, and decided to give them my initial views from a fresh perspective. In my last video I did something I'd never done before. I decided to review 2 games at the same time. These were the Fantastic Four movie license games from 2005 and 2007, which, as those of you who saw that video will know, I wasn't a big fan of those games. To me, despite having some good ideas here and there, those games were just a bit too repetitive, and had a few too many technical issues for me to honestly recommend. The reason I bring all this up is because you might remember that right near the end of that video, I mentioned that if you wanted to play a good Fantastic Four game, then you might as well just play this game, Marvel Ultimate Alliance, since it's essentially a much more refined version of the concept that the Fantastic Four games were going for, and you can choose to play through the entire game as the Fantastic Four if you want to. When I made that statement and finished making that video, I honestly had no idea I'd be reviewing Marvel Ultimate Alliance next. It just so happens that mentioning the game gave me an overwhelming urge to replay it. So I made up my mind. I'll put all my other projects on hold, replay Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and give the game a proper, in-depth retrospective review. When I started playing through it again for the purpose of this review, it didn't take me long to figure out that this was going to be a long-ass video, probably one of my longest, because I have a lot, and I do mean a lot, to say about this game, and it's a game that I have a long and pretty bizarre history with. It's one of the few games that I actually bought multiple different releases of over the years, and suffice it to say, it's a game that really means a lot to me on a personal level. So if I am going to review it, I really want to make sure that I do it justice, to the best of my ability. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to be reviewing Marvel Ultimate Alliance, released in 2006, developed by Raven Software. Before I go any further, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, since it really helps the channel out. And feel free to subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. Let's get started with the review. First of all, a bit about my own personal history with the game. So as long-time subscribers of mine will know, I am a huge fan of the X-Men Legends series. I played those games to death back in the day, and they're some of my personal favourite action-adventure RPGs of all time. What I loved about those games is how they were able to take the X-Men series, which I already had an interest in as a kid, and combine it with one of my personal favourite video game genres. And they were able to craft an original story with a plot that was genuinely complex and well written, with a whole bunch of playable X-Men characters, each of which feeling very different to one another. I reviewed both X-Men Legends games separately on the channel a while back, link in description. I'd appreciate it if you check those out too. As I said, I played through those games to death as a kid and enjoyed every minute of it. Around about that time, I wasn't active on social media at all. In fact, I forget if I even had the internet in my house back then, so naturally I wasn't following any social media or gaming news or culture. And I had no idea whether or not the X-Men Legends series would ever continue. As it happens, at that point in time, I used to watch a TV channel after school called Jetix. You guys remember Jetix? It was a channel that was at the height of its popularity in the mid-2000s. And the reason I used to watch it is because late afternoons they would show several old 90s Marvel cartoons, for example Spider-Man, X-Men, Hulk, Iron Man and several other classics. I remember they used to show these cartoons one after the other, so needless to say that kinda took over my evening routine for a while. As it happens, this is how I initially heard about Marvel Ultimate Alliance, since the game was used to sponsor the old cartoons during the advert breaks. They showed a quick promo for the game, but didn't really give much information about it. All I knew about it was that it was a Marvel game, that combined numerous characters from the Marvel Universe into one game. Shortly after this I bought the game, or more specifically I asked my mother to buy me it since I was like 12 or something when this came out. And it wasn't until after I bought the game and played it for the first time that I realised that the game was essentially an unofficial sequel, or I suppose more specifically a spiritual successor to the X-Men Legends series. It had the same writers, same development team, same publishers and everything, and to top it all off, the game basically used the exact same user interface and the exact same gameplay style as those games, which I was of course already very familiar with. For me personally, this made this game instantly accessible, and I was able to take to it almost immediately. On a side note, it's not exactly clear whether or not the game actually takes place in the same continuity as X-Men Legends, since as far as I'm aware, the events of those games' stories are not directly referenced in this game. But I do think it's heavily implied that they do take place in the same continuity, since Iron Man, who is one of the playable characters here, is also an unlockable playable character in X-Men Legends 2. Aside from that, most of the main X-Men characters from those games do appear in this game, and some of them are even playable. Some of them even have the same voice actors. So yeah, long story short, I think it would be safe to assume that this game is basically X-Men Legends 3. In retrospect, some fans were actually disappointed that the game never followed up on the somewhat ambiguous ending of X-Men Legends 2, since that game's ending did imply a particularly sinister follow-up plot, if you catch my meaning. But despite this, most people accepted this game, and it was a critical and commercial success. So anyway, I got the game, and as I mentioned before, I've owned several versions of it over the years. The version of it I got first was the original Xbox version, and I absolutely loved it. Played through it numerous times and had an absolute blast. It's one of the few games that I find myself being able to 100% time and time again, without ever getting bored of it. Interestingly, the following year in 2007, my mother got me an Xbox 360 for Christmas, as well as a couple of games along with it. One of those games just happened to be the 360 version of Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Despite already owning the previous generation version of the game and loving it, I was actually blown away by how much better the 360 version looked. Not only did the game have a major graphical upgrade, being playable in HD, but even the overall art style of the game seemed to improve significantly, and it just seemed to run a lot more smoothly and was more technically proficient in general. It also came with a couple new playable characters, which was awesome, and I'm glad they included these. A few years after that, I left home and moved away, leaving quite a few of my games behind, something I very much regret to this day, and I decided a few years down the line to rebuy the game. However, I didn't just want to buy the same versions again. I decided to buy the gold edition of the game, which at that point in time was available digitally. Sadly, at the time of this recording, that version is no longer available anywhere digitally. And good luck finding a physical copy of it without setting yourself back hundreds of dollars. I was lucky to get it when I did, but I digress. So yeah, I got the gold edition of the game, which is the version I decided to play through for this review. The gold edition comes with a whole bunch of new playable characters, all the DLC characters basically, more on those later of course. So just like X-Men Legends, this game is a third-person action-adventure RPG with an isometric view. The story of the game is actually a pretty complex one, and it does its best to blend numerous aspects of the wider Marvel Comics universe together. Doctor Doom, along with several other villains, namely Loki, Ultron, Baron Mordo and Enchantress, have formed a cult of supervillains, appropriately named the Masters of Evil.
We have set the stage, and the players have arrived. Now, let us watch and see who will survive this tale of deception.
You gotta appreciate the self-awareness of these OG Marvel villains. No pretense whatsoever, just pure, unapologetic evil. Doom and Loki have essentially concocted a plan to not only take over the world, but the entire universe. I won't give away too much of the plot since, as I mentioned before, it's rather complex and I don't want to spoil everything, but suffice it to say,
Doom's got a plan that's gonna shake the heavens.
The game begins aboard the SHIELD helicarrier, which is a flying aircraft carrier, one of the most iconic Marvel locations. It comes under attack from an army of robots, led by Doctor Doom and his minions.
Doom, I'll have your head for
this.
I have little time for your petty threats, Colonel. Surrender your ship now, or I shall destroy it.
In order to prevent a nuclear disaster, Nick Fury decides to assemble a team of some of the most powerful superheroes from the Marvel Universe to rescue the helicarrier and take on Doom.
This is a priority alert to all metahumans. UNN Alpha requests immediate assistance.
You start off with a useful tutorial where you take control of a default team of 4. The default team you get is Captain America, Thor, Spider-Man, and Wolverine. On a side note, it's never really explained how exactly the team got together in the first place, and how Fury was able to convince so many different Marvel factions to work together. But I suppose it doesn't really matter, does it? For the sake of gameplay, the game kinda skips over those minor details, and gives you a badass team of superheroes to play with, and hey, I'm not complaining. The tutorial basically gives you all the information you need to know how to play the game. And as I mentioned before, if you've played either of the X-Men Legends games, then you know pretty much what to expect. As I mentioned before, you control a team of 4, and fight your way through a series of linear levels, each of which will be filled with numerous different enemies, as well as obstacles and puzzles to overcome. What you'll notice about the game right off the bat is just how fast-paced and hectic everything in the levels is. You have a clear list of objectives to complete during levels, and there's usually quite a bit of urgency. For example, the first level tasks you with stopping the helicarrier from crashing into a nearby city, wiping out millions of innocent people, as well as to prevent several nukes from being launched. Believe it or not, the stakes only get higher and higher as the game goes on. Just like in X-Men Legends, you can switch between each of the 4 characters at any time during combat by using the directional buttons, with each character being allocated to one button. You can even issue basic commands to your entire team, such as telling them to follow you or to attack nearby enemies, and the AI for the most part is relatively competent. The vast majority of the levels will consist of combat. You can strike enemies with both light attacks and heavy attacks. Unlike in X-Men Legends, heavy attacks aren't really made to be used in combos, and instead can be charged up to knock enemies back further and do more damage. I don't mind this personally, since it did help you to deal with tougher enemies from time to time. As you play through the game, you'll figure out which attacks work best on certain enemy types. In addition to these attacks, you can also grab a hold of enemies and perform a beatdown on them. You can also throw them. Throwing them off ledges usually defeats them immediately. In addition to regular combat, just like in X-Men Legends, each character has their own unique superpowers. You once again activate each power by holding down the right trigger, and choosing them from a button menu. The game allows you to customize this by allocating each power to a particular button from the character menu, and thankfully you can change this at any time by pausing the game, or using an extraction point. Speaking of extraction points, this is probably as good a time as ever to talk about the game's roster, because this game has a lot, and I mean a lot, of playable characters in its roster. In fact, it probably has more playable characters than any Marvel game ever, aside from the LEGO games of course, but that's a story for another day. And as I mentioned earlier, depending on what version of the game you're playing, you may have even more characters to play as. The playable characters in the base game you have are the 4 I already mentioned, in addition to Mr. Fantastic, The Thing, the Human Torch, Invisible Woman, Iron Man, Spider-Woman, Elektra, Miss Marvel, Deadpool, who without a shadow of a doubt gets some of the best lines of dialogue in the game.
I haven't seen you in weeks. Where have you been hiding?
In the hospital, you stabbed me in the leg. Remember?
Oh yeah, that's right. But I had to. You were trying to eat the last cheesy puff.
It was my bag of cheesy puffs.
Storm, Luke Cage, and Iceman. In addition to these, there are also several unlockable characters. These are Doctor Strange, Ghost Rider, Blade, Daredevil, Black Panther, Nick Fury, and my personal favourite, Silver Surfer. I'll talk a bit more about how you go about unlocking these characters a bit later. Exclusive to the 7th generation version of the game, meaning Xbox 360, PS3 and Wii versions, you get 2 new characters. These are Colossus and Moon Knight. Both are pretty cool. As I mentioned before, with the Gold Edition you get all the DLC characters, which were unfortunately removed from being individually purchased shortly after they were introduced due to licensing issues. These characters are the Incredible Hulk, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Hawkeye, Magneto, Venom, Sabretooth, and even Doctor Doom himself. Yeah, this makes the final boss battle a bit awkward.
Finally, face to face with myself. This is most unusual.
All the characters in the game feel unique in their own way, and as I mentioned before, they all have their own special powers. Just like with X-Men Legends, it's wise to have a team with varied and diverse abilities. For example, certain situations will require characters who have elemental powers. Iceman can put out fires, and this can be very useful. Several characters in the game such as Thor, Iron Man, Silver Surfer, Magneto, Doctor Strange and several others can fly. And this of course can be used to reach areas that most of the other characters can't. Some characters are larger and more durable than others and have super strength. Characters such as the Thing, Colossus, Hulk and Venom can be used to lift and move large obstacles. And there are several challenges in the game where this is necessary. These are basically the standard tank characters, which are always useful in this type of game. Spider-Man and Venom can even swing on webs, and this can be a good alternative to flying, though it's slightly more difficult to control. Iceman can even surf through the air just like he could in the X-Men Legends games. Characters such as Wolverine, Deadpool, Blade, Black Panther, Nightcrawler or Sabretooth have more powerful melee attacks and can slash enemies, doing extra damage. Some of them also have healing abilities. Other characters such as Silver Surfer, Iron Man or Cyclops have powerful ranged energy attacks. Again, certain enemy types will be more or less resistant to certain attacks, which gives you an incentive to try different characters and superpowers. Deadpool and Nightcrawler both have the ability to teleport, which can serve multiple uses in this game. For example, it can allow you to escape from combat when overwhelmed, and can also be used to flank enemies. Interestingly enough, it can also be used to skip certain puzzle sections and avoid certain obstacles. On occasion, it can even be used to return to areas that I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to be able to return to.
It's as if I can't go this way.
The game seems to be inconsistent with whether or not teleporting works though, since certain areas of the game seem scripted to prevent you from using it. I suppose the developers didn't want the player just skipping everything in the levels, since that wouldn't really be in the spirit of things, would it? But I digress. Nonetheless, it was a pretty cool feature. All in all, the game has a whole bunch of different superpowers to play around with, and they're all fun to try out. As I mentioned before, you can allocate each power to a button of your choosing, and decide which one to use at any time. Some of these powers also temporarily increase the stats of your whole team, and can allow them to do or take more damage. I'd advise equipping a ranged attack, a powerful melee attack, and a stat boosting attack for each character, since this can help to make them more well rounded. Plus, if you use a full team of 4, it helps to have characters with different abilities that go well together. I personally tended to have Thor on my team most of the time, since in addition to being able to fly, he also has super strength, powerful melee attacks and a powerful ranged attack. So I found him to be pretty well rounded. Just like in X-Men Legends, in addition to all the regular powers, each character will have their extreme power which will require a momentum boost to use. Once again, these are awesome. They're unique for each character and these all look badass. They can help to bail you out in a tough fight and attack numerous enemies at once. They're also quite useful against regular bosses. If your entire team has a momentum boost, then you can activate them all at once for more damage. Again, this is badass. One of my personal favourite things about the game is the overall level design. It's surprisingly varied and complex, and in my opinion it never feels repetitive. I mentioned before how each level is linear, and to me that's a good thing in this kind of game since it helps to prevent unnecessary backtracking. Each level will be mostly combat based, but every now and then you will come across a new puzzle or a new gimmick of sorts, and the game never repeats these. What helps in this regard is the overall visual variety of the levels themselves. Throughout the game the team will visit numerous areas in the Marvel universe. and all of them look different. And you get a decent amount of context as to why you have to go there. Usually the game will task you with quelling some sort of invasion or rebellion, or preventing some sort of disaster, or to rescue a particular character or group of characters. For example, you travel to the Omega base, which is a giant mobile shield lab, where you have to prevent it from destroying a nearby dam and wiping out the local population. You go to Atlantis, where you get an underwater level. The game explains this by giving your entire team a special drug that lets them breathe and use their powers underwater. You can even use the Human Torch's powers in this level, so I guess this game has SpongeBob physics or something, but I digress. You travel to Asgard to free the Asgardians who have been captured and taken over by Loki and his forces. There's a whole bunch of levels here. You even visit the Bifrost Bridge, as well as going further into Asgard. You travel to Niflheim to battle frost giants. You get a level where the villains send you to a sadistic carnival-themed world called Murder World, populated with murder bots and creepy clowns.
I hope you're ready for a fun-filled day at Murder World, because I've got some killer events lined up.
This level was probably one of my favourites, since it was so unique and quirky, filled with traps and hazards, and even a whole bunch of mini-games, many of them being retro video game themed. For example, you play a game of Breakout, a game of Pitfall, you even get to drive bumper cars for a game of dodgems against enemies, and you can even find bumper cars here and there to use in other parts of the level. There's a lot of dark humour in that level too. That level was absolutely insane and extremely creative. You even travel to Mephisto's realm at one point to rescue Nightcrawler. That level is creepy. So yeah, this game lets you kick the devil's ass, which is awesome.
Take care, my friends, and may God watch over you. Now prepare yourself, Mephisto, for you are about to face the might of the amazing Nightcrawler.
Stay back from me! I command you! Stay back!
Late in the game you get several space levels. For example, you travel to the Shi'ar Empire and get trapped in the middle of a civil war. You also travel to the Skrull planet, which is in the process of being devoured by Galactus. Again, you're trapped right in the middle of the conflict. The game of course culminates in Latveria, where you launch an assault on Doom and his forces. There is so much level and location variety in this game, and it's incredibly creative, and no two levels feel the same. In addition to your primary objectives and levels, you will also come across optional secondary objectives. Some of these are relatively inconsequential, and you can ignore them if you want. Others will serve to give you a major advantage later on in the level. For example, you may be tasked to find a particular item for a particular character, and in exchange for the item they will give you a large amount of experience points. Or perhaps give you information that will help you in a particular battle, or an upgrade that will help to protect you from a particular attack. It's wise to keep an eye out for these and try to interact with them if you can. In addition to these optional objectives, there are others that don't exactly affect your gameplay, but what they do is make a major difference to the game's epilogue. More on that later. These objectives could be rescuing a particular character, or saving or destroying a particular item. For example, in the Skrull level, you actually have the option to save the entire planet from destruction. It's entirely optional, and makes no difference to you during your playthrough, but your actions can have significant consequences in the grand scheme of things. Again, I will discuss a bit more about the epilogue later on. Point being, you have a lot to think about in these levels aside from your main objectives. In addition to the main levels, the game also has several hub worlds in between them. These serve the same function as the ones in X-Men Legends, basically the team's base of operations where they rest between missions and plan their next move. You get a short mission briefing before each mission. These usually include a bit of banter between the team.
Why can't we ever be sent to an alternate dimension filled with lonely supermodels?
'Cause we're going to save Nightcrawler. You got a problem with that?
Nope. Sorry. I'll just be quiet now.
Best news I heard all day.
Interestingly, on occasion, you will even get a mission briefing from the villain's perspective. These can be quite fun to watch also. You actually visit several different hub worlds throughout the game. For example, you visit Stark Tower, the Sanctum Sanctorium, which is the home of Doctor Strange. You visit Valhalla, where you get to hang out with Thor's Viking buddies.
Now this is my kind of party. Look at all this food. Almost makes me wish I was dead.
You even visit Atalan, which is a city based on the moon, home of the superhero team known as the Imperfects. And you even get to meet their leader, Black Bolt.
Hiya, Black Bolt. How are ya? Oh, that's right. You can't talk, can you? Your voice is so powerful, it would destroy half of Atalan if you said anything at all. But come on, let's put that to the test. Just say one tiny word. Spatula.
Each of the hub worlds are different in their overall visual aesthetic, and have plenty of curiosities to interact with. These hub worlds exist mostly for the purpose of role-playing. Speaking of role-playing, this game has dialogue, and I mean a lot of dialogue. As you explore the hub worlds at different stages of the game, there will be numerous characters to talk to further indulge yourself in the game's story. And some of the dialogue you get is genuinely interesting and thought-provoking. You can talk to the likes of Nick Fury, Black Widow, Hank Pym, and Vision throughout the majority of the game. These characters serve to convey the details of each mission to you, as well as to give you further context and backstories of the characters and villains you'll be interacting with in the levels. They usually have interesting things to say, and I would advise talking to everybody you can before starting missions. What's cool about this is that returning to the hub worlds after missions will open up new potential conversations, as well as new characters to talk to and interact with.
Hey, did you see that Professor Xavier's here? With him on the case, Jean Grey and Nightcrawler are as good as free. Hey, come on. This is Professor Charles Xavier we're talking about. The guy's never wrong.
There's a particular side mission in the game that spans several of these hub worlds, involving Black Widow's laptop, and the possibility of her being a traitor. Deadpool's hacker buddy Weasel will be enlisted to do some investigating to help uncover the truth about Black Widow and what she's really up to. I won't spoil the conclusion of the side mission, but suffice it to say, it perfectly ties in with the main plot, and it comes with a whole bunch of conversations that add more context to it. Most of the hub worlds will even have a separate living area where you can talk to not only the game's NPCs, but also many of the playable characters. Again, here you can get so many more conversations, and you can even get to know a bit more about each character's backstory, personality, and even discuss the events of the game with them, hearing their own opinions about the current situation.
That it's a think tank? Yeah. But the big question is, what are they thinking about? Well, are they good guys who are helping humanity? Or are they bad guys who are coming up with new reality shows for TV? It's the same old story you've heard 100 times. Boy gets bit by radioactive spider, boy gets spider superpowers, boy becomes world's most popular crime fighter. You know how it goes.
Playing this game again in retrospect, I was genuinely surprised how much thought and effort went into every single character, and just how much dialogue the game has. You don't see characters with this kind of personality and charm in modern games, that's for sure, and I struggle to remember a time when I was this invested in a game's story, to the point where I wanted to hear from every single character, both playable and non-playable. On a side note, some of the dialogue is really funny too.
Hello, Deadpool.
Black Widow. I've gotta know. Are those real?
I beg your pardon?
Your teeth. Are they real? They're just so darn shiny and straight.
As I mentioned before, Deadpool gets the best lines of dialogue in the game by far.
I remember you. Weren't we on that one mission where we did that one thing against that one guy and we won?
What I liked specifically about Deadpool's inclusion into the game was how his overall meta humour was in such contrast to the rest of the game. I feel as if the whole meta, fourth wall breaking stuff has been done to death at this point, but in this game it was actually a lot more subtle and a lot more clever in my opinion. What a lot of people don't know too is that it was actually this game that gave Deadpool the vast majority of his popularity. since prior to it he wasn't a popular character at all. Fans enjoyed his inclusion in X-Men Legends too, so much so that the developers decided to bring him back here as a playable character. And it made the character way more popular than he ever was before. Another aspect of the game's dialogue that I like is that there are numerous, secret, unique conversations that can be discovered at various locations of the game, depending what characters you have in your party.
So we all die together. That's your big plan?
Always the fool, aren't you, Wolverine? You should know by now I always have an escape plan.
All I know is you called me the dirtiest word in the universe, sister. Your countdown just hit 0. You die now!
X-Men Legends had some of these too, but this game has way more. On a first playthrough, it's practically impossible to hear all these conversations. In fact, in my most recent playthrough, I randomly discovered a few new ones that I wasn't previously aware of.
Hello, Deadpool.
Black Widow, I feel we've known each other long enough that I can ask you, are you putting on weight?
You might have noticed that these conversations don't just occur during the hub worlds, they can actually occur during main levels. When speaking to NPCs in the levels, if that NPC has some sort of relationship with a particular character in your party, chances are they might spark up a unique conversation. This doesn't just apply to allies, it even applies to boss battles. For example, a hero may come across one of his own personal villains, and they banter with each other accordingly.
Mysterio! Jeez, it's good to see you. Still got a fishbowl for a head, I see.
Some of these are actually pretty funny.
Well, if it isn't two of my favorite psychos, Scorpion and Lizard, how are you kids doing?
Always the comedian, aren't you, Webhead?
Now, is that any way to talk to someone who brought you a nice new lily pad to sit on?
He's a lizard, you moron, not a frog.
And some of them are utterly hilarious.
What's your superpower, loser? Being ugly?
Oh, that is pretty tough talk, coming from somebody that's dressed like they belong in a zoo.
Maybe you don't know who you're talking to, Slick, but I'm the Rhino. And my feet are gonna be the last things you see in this life as I trample you.
For a minute there, you had me scared. But then I realized you weren't gonna attack me with your smell.
Yeah, these had me in stitches at times. I think this is probably the most memorable thing about the game for me, just how much personality it has. It feels like a true, genuine roleplay experience. Another surprising aspect of this is that even the DLC characters, who aren't playable in the vanilla version of the game, have some unique conversations of their own.
I thought for a moment we had lost you. Arcade was controlling you, using you. I couldn't bear to think... Are you alright?
They don't make a lot of sense for obvious reasons, but I appreciate their inclusion nonetheless. So yeah, long story short, the game has a whole bunch of level and location variety, with main levels that are mostly combat based, and hub worlds for chilling out and roleplaying. In addition to all this, the game also has a huge amount of enemy variety. You take on numerous different enemy types in the game, all of which feel very different from one another. For example, you take on numerous robotic enemies, such as Doombots of various kinds. You fight these at various stages of the game. You also take on Ultron's robotic minions here and there. Speaking of Ultron's minions, I noticed there was one section of the scroll level where you fight a bunch of them. I wonder if that was a developer oversight, or were they hinting at Ultron having some sort of business with the Skrull. You take on soldiers of various kinds, such as MODOK's AIM troopers, several alien enemies such as the Skrull, as well as Galactus's faction, who will actually fight each other when in the same area. You take on creepy clown enemies in Murder World, several types of demons in Mephisto's realm, as well as Asgardian enemies such as trolls, elves and frost giants. Some of the enemies will be larger and more durable, others will be smaller and quicker. Some of them will use ranged attacks, others will use melee attacks. You also fight several shielded enemies throughout the game, and you can usually grab the shield off them. Some enemies will even have melee weapons that you can take off them and wield yourself. Many of these do a huge amount of damage. The game's levels also have a huge amount of destructible environments, and some of the physics are actually quite impressive for 2006. There are also numerous items that can be picked up and thrown at enemies to do range damage. There's just so much variety in the game, and so many ways to approach combat that I'm not sure if I can even describe it all in one video. Needless to say, this is a game that has so much replay value, for all the reasons previously mentioned. In addition to regular enemies, the game has a lot of boss battles. Probably more boss battles than any other game I've ever played. As I mentioned earlier, Doctor Doom has assembled the world's largest team of supervillains, and the game uses this to its full advantage, giving you as many boss battles as it could cram in there. How it works is each level will usually have a couple of regular bosses at various stages of it, and a main boss at the end. The main bosses of course being much more powerful and challenging. As far as regular bosses go, some of these you will take on just one at a time, others you will take on 2 or more at once. For example, you take on the likes of Bullseye, Grey Gargoyle, Ultimo, Crimson Dynamo, the Wrecking Crew, Rhino and Shocker, who you take on multiple times, one time even the pair of them at once.
Rhino and Shocker? How'd they get together? Computer dating?
Lizard and Scorpion, Enchantress and her Executioner, Mysterio, Baron Mordo and Ultron, Gladiator, yeah, the guy who bitch-slapped Juggernaut that time, Atuma.
I'm a tumor, I'm a tumor, I'm a tumor. I'm a tumor, I'm a tumor, I'm a tumor. Oh, I'm a tumor.
Titanus, Super Skrull, Winter Soldier, Radioactive Man, and so many more. As far as the main bosses go, I mentioned before these usually come at the end of each level, and are much harder, and usually take a lot longer to defeat. For example, you take on Mandarin, MODOK, who gives you a quiz first.
What does MODOK stand for? Impossible! Is one of you reading my mind?
Deathbird, Loki. You even get several giant bosses. Most of these can't be damaged with regular attacks, and you will need to perform a series of quick-time events to defeat them, or use a particular weapon. For example, you take on the dragon Fin Fang Foom at the end of the first level, where you have to shoot him out of the sky with a huge turret gun, and attack him when he lands. You fight Arcade in his giant battle mech. You fight Ymir, the massive frost giant. You fight the Kraken in the underwater level. You take on Mephisto in his realm. Come to think of it, that was probably the hardest boss fight for me, since he uses the attack that confuses your character and messes up your controls. You even get an epic battle against Galactus, where you need to force him to damage himself with his own attack. This is after he chases you around the Skrull planet for a while. You take on the Destroyer armor, which is actually very easy if you know what you're doing. And finally, of course, you get an epic battle with Doctor Doom, which is awesome. There are so many boss battles in the game, and so many of them are epic, and I enjoyed them personally. I have seen some people criticise the bosses, since the larger ones utilise quick-time events as I mentioned, but me personally, I don't mind quick-time events, as long as they're not used as a difficulty spike, and the ones in this game are usually quite easy. The challenge comes from getting the boss into a position to perform these quick-time events, while not taking too much damage yourself, and there is some strategy and skill involved. The game also has a pretty simple leveling up system. Leveling works pretty much the same way as it did in X-Men Legends. As you play through the game, defeating enemies and completing objectives, you will unlock experience points for each character. Earn enough experience points and your characters will automatically level up. Getting to certain levels will unlock specific powers and abilities for you to use. Leveling up will also gain you skill points. These can be used to upgrade each character's specific power. How it works in this game is a bit different, and a bit more simplistic than it is in X-Men Legends. While playing through levels you can collect coins. These can be collected by defeating enemies or breaking certain objects or containers in the environment. These coins act as currency that can be spent on stat upgrades for each character. I have heard some criticism over the years in regards to them simplifying the leveling system from X-Men Legends 2, since in that game there were significantly more customization options, and there was a lot more you could do with it, and it was a little bit more complicated. And to an extent I do agree, but it's not a big deal in my opinion. If nothing else, it makes the game a bit more accessible for casual gamers. It can take a long time to level up your characters, but thankfully there are plenty of ways to grind experience points. For example, you can return to levels as many times as you want and the enemies will respawn in them, giving you an easy way to farm points. In addition to this, there are also other ways to gain points in levels, most notably by completing optional objectives. Also, you can actually find large XP boosts at various predetermined locations, as well as skill points, but these are very rare. Another way to gain points is to play the trivia game. Each hub world has a trivia game just like in X-Men Legends for you to interact with. Here you will get a whole bunch of multiple choice questions relating to the wider Marvel universe. If you're a big Marvel fan, then you can test your knowledge with these. What's cool about this too is that many of the answers to these questions will be hinted at by simply speaking to the characters in the nearby levels or even the very hub world that that particular trivia is located, showing that the developers put a lot of time and effort into these, and gave the player yet another incentive to explore the game and speak to characters. I'm glad they added these. You can also increase your individual stats by finding focus upgrades that are scattered all over the game. Collecting these will automatically increase a particular stat for the character that picked them up. Another way to gain experience is to do comic missions. These basically replace the Danger Room training missions from X-Men Legends. They act in pretty much the same way. By exploring the game you can find comic discs scattered around the levels and hub worlds. These are usually easy to find, yet a few of them are quite well hidden. As long as you take your time, don't rush, and be sure to look around, you will most likely find them. The comic missions are broken up into two categories. You have boss missions, where you can take a team of your choosing through a level to take on a particular boss that the mission is named after. And you have each character's solo comic mission. This will task you with playing through a short level as that specific character alone, where you will fight your way through a wave of enemies with a time limit. And these missions will usually end with a boss battle. Usually a boss enemy with some kind of grudge against the character. For example, in the Things mission, you take on Rhino at the end. As we established earlier, those two don't like each other. The most interesting one for me was Daredevil's mission, since it forces you to play in the dark, simulating what it would be like to be blind, and to play purely on instinct. That was quite an interesting idea and I enjoyed it. At the end of each mission you will get a grade, and there are 3 medals to obtain: bronze, silver and gold. Of course, with me being an absolute Chad, I was able to get gold in every single one of them, so yeah. Or does that make me a loser with no life? We'll go with Chad since that sounds better, but I digress. As I mentioned before, you can use these to gain experience points and level up characters quicker. So yeah, the leveling system is fine and easy enough to understand, even for casual players who don't have much experience with RPGs. In addition to leveling your characters, you can also often obtain gear throughout the game, and the gear can be used to equip your character, and these can offer you specific perks and stat boosts. Again, this can be fun to play around with. There's even a moment in the game during the Asgard level where you get a chance to use a forge, and you can craft your own armour. I enjoyed that. Another major change from X-Men Legends is how you refill your health and energy. In those games you could collect a certain number of portable health and energy packs, and use them when you choose to. In this game, the health and energy balls are simply used automatically as you touch them. You can get them from fallen enemies or from breakable objects in the environment, just like the coins. I personally prefer the portable health packs, but that's just me. As far as the graphics and presentation go, I think the game looks great for 2006, particularly the 360 version. Sure, the character models are dated and pixelated by today's standards, but let's not forget that this game was originally developed for 6th generation consoles, and you have to take into consideration the technical limitations of the time, as well as the fact that it came out only 1 year after X-Men Legends 2, meaning it probably didn't have a long development cycle. One aspect of the presentation that in my opinion couldn't have been better though, is the pre-rendered cutscenes. These are absolutely beautiful, and I don't know how they were able to make them look so good back then. Also, this game has an absolutely banging soundtrack. I particularly love the music from the first level, that was awesome.
You should have surrendered.
Each level has music that perfectly suits the overall tone, such as the sci-fi-esque music of the Shi'ar levels. Or the twisted carnival music in Murder World. great music and a perfect example of something I've said several times on the channel before. A soundtrack can make or break a game. Since we're on the subject of presentation, I figured now would be a good time to talk about some of my criticisms, and believe me, there aren't many. But you guys know me, I can find faults in anything, so here we are. The game does have a few minor technical issues. For example, here I was playing through Asgard, and Nightcrawler just randomly started having a seizure. This went on for ages and I didn't know how to fix it. He was like that for a huge chunk of the level. There are also a few minor quest bugs here and there, such as dialogue repeating, or showing up in the wrong place. For example, there's one mission where Wong asks you to find an item, and then as soon as you find the item, the mission just ends, and you don't get a chance to bring it back to him, it just completes itself, which I'm sure was a mistake, or an oversight from the developers. I mentioned earlier about the side mission involving Weasel, and him investigating Black Widow's laptop. That side mission is very glitchy, and it can easily be broken. It's also a mission that can be completed without even following the official steps, if you know what you're doing with it. Aside from that, there are a few clipping and collision detection problems, as well as areas where you can get out of bounds. For example, here I was flying around Niflheim with Thor, and was able to leave the bounds of the level. In fact, when you think about it, this kinda makes sense, since Thor is supposed to be able to travel the cosmos. There are also certain areas of the game where the music will bug out, so I suppose you could consider that a minor technical issue. So yeah, the game does have a few issues. But again, these are technical issues and not gameplay issues. And there's nothing major. So yeah, that's as far as it goes in terms of negatives. I can't really think of anything else to criticise. So that pretty much sums up what the game has to offer in terms of gameplay. Thankfully, it also has a whole bunch of bonus features. I mentioned before that you will need to unlock some of the playable characters, but I didn't really explain how this works. Basically, aside from Ghost Rider, who is automatically unlocked at a predetermined point in the story, and Nick Fury, who is automatically unlocked after completing the story, each character will have a specific requirement to unlock, and can be easily missed. For example, both Daredevil and Black Panther will require you to collect action figures hidden around the game. There are 5 action figures for each of them, and by collecting all 5 of each, you can unlock these characters to play as. Doctor Strange will simply ask you to find an item for him in one of the levels, and he will join your team immediately after. You can unlock Blade by winning him in a claw machine. That still cracks me up to this day. The hardest character to unlock is Silver Surfer. To unlock him, you will have to first find every comic disc and complete them all. I would recommend doing this because Silver Surfer is a badass. He's one of the most powerful characters in the game, and I enjoyed playing as him. In addition to unlocking these new characters, you can also unlock new costumes for each character. Many of these are based on the classic comic designs of the characters. For example, the symbiote Spider-Man suit, or Wolverine's classic yellow suit, or the classic Thor design. These look great, and again, they do their bit to add to the game's replay value. The costumes aren't just cosmetic either. They actually have stats that can be individually upgraded in the character menu. Weirdly, Silver Surfer's costumes all look the same, but I digress. In addition to these bonus features, you also have a whole bunch of concept art to look at, just like the comic discs and the action figures. These can be found hidden around the game, and after you've collected them, you can view them at the review screen in each hub world. What's cool about this is that you also get some concepts for some cut content in the game, such as the Baxter building, which I assume was considered as a location for one of the hub worlds. I found that quite interesting. In addition to this, you can also view a bunch of comic covers, as well as rewatch the game's cutscenes. You also get a trailer for the movie Ultimate Avengers 2 for what it's worth. Another pretty cool feature, and one that adds an almost endless amount of replay value, is the ability to replay the game with all your upgrades and stats from your previous save. You gain the ability to do this after completing the game on normal or hard. You simply start a new game and choose from the menu which save you want to import the data from. What you might find with this too, is that the unlockable characters might even have some new dialogue, with NPCs and bosses that might not have been possible to discover on a first playthrough. So yeah, you can play through the game as many times as you want and continue to level up your characters, and find all the collectibles and the curiosities you may have missed the first time. Another reason you might want to replay the game is the epilogue. I mentioned before how several optional objectives will affect the epilogue. Basically, when you complete the game, You get a summary of how your actions or inactions affected the whole Marvel universe. You get to learn exactly what the consequences are of your actions, and how you can avoid them on your next playthrough. I really appreciate this since it helps to further immerse you into the game's lore, and just makes it so much more fun. It was an interesting idea. So that pretty much sums up the game. It's a legendary RPG that does pretty much everything I would have expected from the time, and I only have minor criticisms for it. It's hard for me to grade a game like this objectively, since it's a game that I have a lot of nostalgia for, and as I mentioned, I do have a personal connection to it. But even playing through the game in retrospect and seeing what it has to offer, I honestly think it's better than most, if not all, modern RPGs. It's just a game that is easily immersive, well written, and an absolute blast to play. As I mentioned before, it's a game I've completed numerous times over the years, and I have fun with it every single time. I give Marvel Ultimate Alliance a solid and well-deserved 9 out of 10. I'm tempted to give it a perfect 10, but with there being some technical issues and a few broken quests, I could see it being a bit frustrating for some people. I'd say I like it slightly more than X-Men Legends 2, but not quite as much as X-Men Legends 1, though that may be because I think the first game had the most interesting story and writing. From a gameplay perspective, this one might be slightly better, and the ability to replay the game with all your level ups is something I wish the first game had. But yeah, I still prefer the first game for some reason. It is what it is. So yeah, this game gets a 9 out of 10. I'm sure some of you are going to be curious about my views on the sequel, Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2. I bought that one back when it came out, and I played through it a couple of times. However, at this point in time I no longer own that game, so I don't have any footage of it. I do intend to rebuy it however at some point, and give it a review just like this one, but that won't be for a while. Suffice it to say, and bear in mind it's been many years since I last played it, I can remember there being several things about it that hindered the experience for me. For one, the story was nowhere near as interesting or as grandiose as this game. I mean, let's be honest, this game kinda blows its load in the story department, and there was no way that they were going to be able to top it in a sequel, not with how consequential and high the stakes were. I mean, going from a potential universe-ending threat involving the likes of Doom and Galactus, to a Civil War storyline and a superhuman registration act, was never going to be as interesting. But I've said enough. Again, I'll review that game when I get a chance to replay it. Thanks for watching, guys. I know this was a long one, but this is a game that I have a deep personal connection with, and I wanted to make sure I did it justice. Feel free to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, because it really helps me, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more videos just like this one. Stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again, I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.
And God, mein Freund.